Hi, this is Kyle Higgins, and you're listening to the Geekcast Radio Network.
Hello, and welcome to the Comic Concierge Podcast, the podcast that believes comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one. This is one of my weekly wrap-up episodes where I go through the week that was in comics, talk about some notable issues, and give my thoughts and opinions on them. I do want to say and apologize for being off for longer than expected. Unfortunately, some things came up, scheduling-wise, life-wise. I was on vacation for a while, so it's been a while since I've had a weekly recommend podcast and took a little bit of a break there, but hopefully we'll be back in full force moving forward. Luckily, this is a week to come back as there's tons to talk about, a lot to discuss. If this is your first time listening to this episode, do know that I do get to some spoilers. I do try to avoid the big surprises. This week is going to be really difficult to do that, but in the show notes, you will see timestamps for each book I'll be talking about. So if you want to skip spoilers, you'll be able to do that by checking those. Do know I also start with each week my recommendation of the week, and my recommendation of the week isn't necessarily what I think is the best book of the week, but what I think is one of the best starting points for that week. Because, you know, if I recommend a great book, but it's halfway through the arc, may not be a great spot to start reading it. It's an idea if you're walking into a comic book store, want to read something, whether you've been reading for years or reading for the first time, what would be that book that came out this week? And for me, it was Immortal Hulk #2 by Ewing and Joe Bennett. And I really enjoyed the first issue of Immortal Hulk, the approach that Al Ewing is taking with this more horror-esque atmosphere type of style with the character of the Incredible Hulk. We saw in the No Surrender series Hulk come back from the dead, and we got a little glimpse into how he'd be approaching the character, but this is really diving deeper into it. The first issue was good. I think it did a good job of setting the stage, but I think what I really appreciate about this series, it's as if someone took the Bill Bixby series in the 60s and decided, let's have that episodic nature of telling the story where each week we tell something new. Each week is, a story that is not necessarily connected to what came before specifically, but this approach, like I said, it's more of a horror-esque approach to it. So with this, Bruce Banner finds himself in another small town where mysterious deaths appear to be happening, and he begins to investigate it, and he senses danger, and it leads him to the discovery of what's really been happening. And I love the theme within this, and what we see is this idea of the fear of death, the fear of mortality, which makes a lot of sense considering this book is called The Immortal Hulk, and a character basically fearing death not only for himself, for his loved ones, doing everything he possibly can to avoid it, but ironically, quickly learning that there are fates much worse than death and having to deal with that. And I think it's a really cool idea, and it's really appropriate for a character like the Hulk to see that, because Hulk is always, Bruce Banner is that character that's always been dealing with this curse of being the Hulk, dealing with the weight of it in a way, and how and for him, he's always been looking for escape himself, but like having this he's almost like a vengeful-esque character in a way, almost more Ghost Rider or the Punisher, finding these individuals who've done some horrific things, and the Hulk then comes out to enact that punishment, seek vengeance, even if it's not for himself. And what's also kind of odd with this is we're 2 issues into this series already, and I don't think we've seen on the page the Hulk throw a punch. There's been no smashing whatsoever. The biggest action pieces, where we see the Hulk dish out damage, we see the after effects, but the actual damage itself, it's been done off the page. Now, for many people that want their classic, punch them in the face, Hulk smash type of character, you may not really like this. You might find it dull or uninteresting, but if you want a different approach to it, if you want to see Hulk is one of those characters that it seems every time you have a new person take on the character, they all have their different approaches to how they want to take it. Especially the 90s, we had Joe Fix-It type of Hulk, we have Great Hulk, we have Smart Hulk, Dumb Hulk, and we've had the same type of Hulk outside the fact we had on Adiz's show as Hulk for a while, but Bruce Banner has been relatively the same type of character for some time, so it makes a lot of sense to take that and, okay, let's try to again reinvent him for a new generation. Considering he was dead, we learned a little bit more why he gave Hawkeye that arrow and why he thought like he basically at one point would need to be killed, and that's still permeating in the background. But if you've never read Sacred Empire, don't know that story, if you're not super familiar with the Hulk, this does work as I think a good lead-in issue. Everything you need to know for the most part is self-contained within this book. It's really been welcoming to new readers, and looking at all the fresh start books that have come out over the last 2 months or so, a lot of them have changed writers, creative teams, and things of that nature. Been different approaches, but of any of them, of the one I think is probably the biggest fresh start, quote unquote, is easily the Immortal Hulk. It's refreshing in the sense of it does feel like something new, even though this approach has been done before. But at the same time, it also is really exciting to read. And I think ultimately it's, still only 2 issues in, but of all the titles, the one I would probably recommend the most, I think is the highest quality as of so far. But there have been a number of other ones I've enjoyed a lot as well. But there's just something different about this compared to most of the other superhero books and most of the other Marvel books that makes it really stand out. And part of that too is the art of Joe Bennett, who has done some good work in his career. But I don't know if it's just the inspiration of this title, just finding the right medium or the right theme for his work, but he's really standing out to me. And if he was doing work at this level his entire career, he probably would be a more notable name. He really designs the Hulk well and gives him that monster-like feel. I think that's really, it starts and begins with the way he approaches the character. And it's interesting because this is a Hulk that, is verbose when it comes to his dialogue. He's talking a lot, and it's strange to see a Hulk talk like that. And it's also very hard to draw because you have to make it seem like he's emoting in a way that he has that viciousness in his nature, and he gets that across the page. And there's a lot of great examples of just that haunting nature of that Hulk, showcasing it in the windows, the reflection, some key elements you always would expect with a Hulk comic, but he's really establishing that atmosphere extremely well. And kudos is this team working out. I know when it comes to Marvel books, we don't tend to see an artist on it for 4 issues at the most. And one thing I do wonder is if a new artist comes in, will this maintain itself? Is his work a big part of why it works now? Because approaching a book like this, having that type of feel to it, I don't think you can just put any artists on this and it will work as effectively. Like right now we have Ed McGuinness on the Avengers. I could not imagine his style working with this type of Hulk story, even though Ed McGuinness has done plenty of Hulk books before. Just the cartoony nature wouldn't work. I like cartoony style, but doesn't necessarily fit every story. So I hope that Marvel is keeping that in mind as they're choosing artists for this. And I don't know if this is a book that will go on or for 12 issues, 24 issues, what have you, but I'm really liking it. Highly advise picking it up. Like I said, even if you're not a huge, gigantic Hulk fan, I think this might actually be a good one to pick up, because I could see many Hulk purists not enjoying it because they're getting a very different approach to a character and not getting a lot of the things that you would expect with a character that is stronger than everyone and angry as could be. Not a lot of punching, which is kind of odd but welcoming for a Hulk series. So I like to start each week with the number of books that almost made recommendation of the week, and Immortal Hulk was number 1, but another book that came relatively close to nabbing that title was The Quantum Age number 1 by Jeff Lemire and art by Wilfred Torres. And this is another spin-off book of the world of Black Hammer, and I've been liking pretty much all things connected to Black Hammer, to the main series, to show like Frankenstein, to the Dr. Star series that I thought was on par with that of Black Hammer, to now the Quantum Age number 1. I will say, I think of all the things that have come out for Black Hammer, this is probably, I would rank this near the bottom of it, but the bottom is still quite good, still better than most books. And what this is telling a story about the future world of Black Hammer, taking place a couple 1,000 years or so into the future, with characters that are indirectly connected with some of the Black Hammer characters. And I hear a lot of people connect this to something like the Legion of Superheroes for DC. And as someone who's not read a lot of Legion of Superhero books, I've experienced them here and there, mostly with things like the cartoon series and stuff like that. So I can't speak how well it connects to something of that nature, but I can definitely see where that approach is coming from. And I like where this is going. We see a future where some things have happened where the Earth is in like a Big Brother-like situation where there are a lot of soldiers on the streets, a lot of control over who can be who, begins with a new team of heroes that is dealing with a threat, and suddenly things go haywire as you would expect for the world of Black Hammer. And that's what I really like about Jeff Lemire's take on these characters is as if you gave him a lot of classic characters, a lot of notable characters, but gave him the freedom to do pretty much whatever he would want to do with them. And I think that's the case here. Some horrific things happen to some characters very quickly, dealing with the Martians and dealing with kind of the aftermath of a major battle that took place and what that means. And our heroes are in a disarray. The Quantum League that was the heroes of their day no longer are, and we're seeing a character pop up that tried to bring them back together for his own reasons. So if you've not read any of the Black Hammer stuff, any of the spin-off series and the main series, could you pick this up and enjoy it and understand everything? I think so. I do think you'd get a little extra special for you if you have read that. And like I said, I don't think it's necessarily at this point up to the par of the other books. Like Dr. Starr to me had a very huge emotional hook, especially with the first issue. This doesn't necessarily have that. It's kind of fun and interesting, but it's a little bit more surface level, at least so far, with its approach compared to the other series. So it's probably more like Sherlock Frankenstein than it is like Dr. Starr, but it still has time to develop and change and add more to it. Don't know how many pages this is or how many issues this is expected to go. Most of the spin-offs have gone around 5 issues or so I would assume that is the case as well. I'm just simply amazed by the fact that Jeff Lemire can write as many books as he does. The art from Wilfred Torres is pretty strong as well. Very different aesthetic than any of the other books, and that's kind of interesting about the Black Hammer universe, is that even though it's a self-contained universe, unlike something like Astro City, the art style does very, very, very much like even within the book itself. Like in the normal Black Hammer universe, when they're showing the town they're stuck in compared to the Black Hammer universe they came from, the style changes very rapidly. And this is kind of somewhere in between. Torres has a very distinct line with his work, which is different. It's a little bit more stylized than the other Black Hammer books, which have more true to life type of drawing, but which may be why it's a little bit more surface level. We'll see. But again, I would recommend it, and good coloring by Dave Stewart. Not as overly dark as you would expect with his work, but still another recommend for me. Another book that was almost recommendation of the week for me was Lowlifes #1, which is a book I went into not expecting that much from, honestly, because the cover didn't really catch my eye that much. Obviously that classic saying, don't judge a book by its cover, but with comics it's hard not to, and partially because the cover has a certain aesthetic to it that it didn't necessarily convey the type of story that we ended up getting, partially because when I quickly looked at the cover, it looks almost like we see this woman with a shirt open, the way she's posed, but if you pay close enough attention, you see, there's actually blood there. And as we get into this book, we find out it's a story about a cop who is dealing with the fact that his wife was assaulted. And unfortunately, because of certain things, the person that assaulted her sexually has gotten free, and he's on the street. And it begins with actually a flash forward where we see him end up, and we take a step back, get an understanding of where we're going, and then we see that clearly some bad things have happened to push him over the edge, and we're going to basically watch that journey of him going down, this destructive path of trying to basically seek revenge for his wife, but of course, as often is the case with revenge, not necessarily go the way it's expected. So this is not like rewriting the book on storytelling, but I thought it was handled quite well. And I think, again, what really surprised me was the book ended up being a lot more street level, a lot more human drama than I was expecting, especially for IDW, who do a variety of really good books, but they don't. This feels much more like an Image title than it does an IDW title, and in a way that helps it stand out a little bit more. I don't really. There's been some crime stories when it comes to IDW, but there's no natural element to this. I don't think it's based upon any type of property, so it's not the type of book that I would say expect IDW to put out. I'm glad that they are showing that they can be more versatile, but also if you're kind of putting it aside or dismissing it because you don't like IDW's typical stuff, or you just stick with their licensed property, maybe give it a shot. If you like the noir type of story, it's not super atmospheric, and again, it's dealing with a type of story we perhaps seen before, but it could always go in a different direction that you're not expecting, and it was at least well executed, I will say. So definitely would recommend picking that up. In addition, the art was good, wasn't not to me the selling point, but if you like that recipe of the revenge gone wrong, I think this is a potential good example of that. It's the first issue. It got my attention, and I'll be reading it. They're trying to read it continuously to see if it can maintain that. All right, I've been holding off talking about it, but eventually I had to get there, and that's Batman number 50, probably one of the most talked about books of the year. I did do a YouTube video on this as well, so if you want to check that out, go to the Geekcast YouTube page. And often, much of the discussion about Batman 50 has been everything surrounding it. The spoilers of a New York Times article, the hubbub and insanity that caused, and also people vehemently upset about the outcome. And again, I try to avoid spoilers when it comes to these reviews, but in this case, I think it's impossible, because saying there was a spoiler kind of allows you to know that something happens that's unexpected. But at the same time, it's in a way to have a coherent discussion about this book specifically, I will spoil it. So if you've not read Batman 50 or don't care about it being spoiled, do note that I'm going to let you know that Catwoman decided not to show up for a wedding because, she does what she wants to do. She's a free woman. But now I ended up liking Batman number 50. I know there's a lot of people who disliked it for a variety of different reasons. And I think there are some valid criticisms in the sense of that, it's a Prozac style where we get a number of pinups and two letters being written, one by Catwoman, one by Batman, and their connection to one another, and all centering on this metaphor of the eyes and what it means. And perhaps it's heavy-handed, and perhaps the two letters don't necessarily feel like they're coming from two different people. Certainly, you can see that the writer, especially, I would say, the writer's voice is prevalent throughout both of them. Tom King's voice is there, but what I liked about this, I think outshines that, and I seem to be, I don't know, I feel like I'm taking a different perspective when it comes to the outcome of this than most, where, a lot of people are focusing on the fact that Catwoman did not show up because she's afraid if she does and she marries Batman, that means Batman will be happy, and Bruce Wayne can't be happy for Batman to coexist. And I took much of this and evidence of this book saying that Batman's interaction, the way he's speaking to Catwoman, that's actually not in fact the case. That yes, Catwoman's justification might be right. Her reasoning for doing what she's doing is for a place of mercy in a way, but she made the wrong choice for the right reason. And we're seeing evidence that Batman, in fact, can be happy, and it maybe need to be happy in order to do what he's doing, or he's going to lead to an eventual path of self-destruction. The idea of being Batman is his suicide, and it will eventually kill him. And there's a line, for example, where he's speaking with Alfred, and he asks if he could be happy, and Alfred indicates, based upon everything he's doing, everything he has to do, doesn't he have to be? And there's a great interaction between him and Alfred where he asks Alfred to be his best man. And I think what we're seeing is a Batman coming to realization that he can have both, that he can balance that life. And in a way he has. Like, he's had family connections. He has had an element of happiness. Yes, the death of his family has been there, that drive. But even with, Alfred by his side, he's had a father figure. He's had more than most even though his parents have been killed in front of him, not just because of his money connection, but he's had the Bat family, Alfred, where many people haven't had that. And I took a lot of the indication, a lot of what Batman was saying to Catwoman as him coming to that realization that he was hiding much of this from himself. He taking the character, coming to assumptions about who Batman is and what Batman needs to be, and maybe that's not the case, and perhaps having someone by his side could make him into someone stronger. And I think a lot of that, like I said, was indicated in that line about how he has to be happy in order to maintain this, because eventually it would kill him. It would be his suicide, because he can only go that path for so long. And then looking back at the Batman Annual, where we got a type of future where they do end up together, and he is able to be that hero. So Tom King has indicated that he has got a 100-story run. And I think a lot of people are focusing on the fact of what Catwoman's decision, the reasons for it, and I think that makes sense. And of course, she's the person that decided to leave. But at the same time, I find that fascinating, that idea, or at least what I'm taking from it, that we're thinking of something like classic Romeo Juliet, where you have two characters who make a decision, basically based upon the lack of knowledge that they have. There's a thinking that they're killing themselves because they won't be there with the other person, but not having the full knowledge of, no, he's actually not dead, but now because of that vicious cycle of them ended up not being together. And there's a line where Batman and Catwoman both indicate that they didn't finish their letters, and perhaps just showcasing the lack of communication and how that can be your detriment. How if they were able to finish those letters and kind of go that extra step, maybe they wouldn't end up in different rooftops on that night. I will say the one thing that has me concerned was the last panel, the last page, of us finding out that perhaps much of this was orchestrated by Bane. I think that really undercuts pretty much everything if that's the case, because it's been a very character-centric journey that I've enjoyed, and that's a big piece of what I've liked about this run. And if much of it was not a journey of self-discovery, but one of kind of forceful manipulation, I think that hurts a lot of what the book was getting at. Now, we may not be seeing what we think we're seeing. It may not. Was this just a case of Bane taking advantage of a situation that was in front of him? Was that perhaps an illusion of some sort? Because we're seeing some things that are rather odd, like Joker working with anyone. I think that was the Batman from Flashpoint. Also, the Booster Gold thing. So I don't know. That is the one thing, more so than Catwoman's decision, which eventually, I think her saying no is still, I hear people saying it's a lead up to nothing happened. Saying no is, to me, more dramatic and more, tragedy breeds better comedy, or beats better drama than that of complacency. But just that last page is the thing that has me the most concerned. But I'm waiting to see if I have a feeling that there are things being manipulated there. At least that's my hope, because I don't want to find out that no, it was actually Bane who's the one that drove Batman to try to marry someone and then that seems a little bit too, it's like the trope of like they were dead the entire time, of the trope of like, oh, they were it was all a dream. Like that is like, can be hokey. So I hope that's not the case. But outside of that, I thought, like, besides my gripes with things, I thought Warner's effective. Michael Janin, the art is, I liked his art, but perhaps he maybe wasn't the best choice for all the different sequences. I think someone with more expression could have perhaps done a better job of conveying some of the key moments. But outside of that, I thought, it was a cavalcade of pretty much anyone who's ever been on Batman, which was an approach I wasn't expecting. Maybe that's kind of why I tend to gravitate towards people taking chances with things, and even if it doesn't fully work, I appreciate people trying to work with the medium and experiment. And even a failed experiment to me is more enjoyable to read than just something that is kind of run-of-the-mill, your typical story. But I'd be curious to know other people's take, because I know there's people who swear off reading Batman ever again. It reminds me similar of what happened with Spider-Man with One New Day. A lot of reaction, but I think one thing that people are missing out, the fact is, people actually cared about the result of a wedding in a comic book story, which is usually never the case. Usually when a wedding happens, no one really cares all that much, but perhaps it was all the build-up, perhaps it was just the story that was being told, but people wanted to see this happen, and that to me is a sign of a good story. If it, if you're wanting to see an actual marriage, even if this is fictional, and it impacting you in that way. But who knows? I know there's many people that feel very differently, which they are certainly free to do. Also coming out this week on the heels of Batman 50 was Catwoman #1, which is written and drawn by Joelle Jones. And I was super excited for this because I've enjoyed Joelle Jones, her work that she's been able to do with Batman, and especially her work on Lady Killer. And I've talked about that series previously on this podcast with Jason Michael. You can check that out. It was a really fun discussion that we went in depth about that series and her work there. And now seeing her work within a DC main title is kind of crazy. Exciting to see that turnover. I do think with Catwoman #1, it does seem like she's trying to certainly fit her style into a character that's not her own, which maybe takes a little bit of time. And I thought this was a good first issue, maybe not great. It's ended better than it started. I think it was a little front loaded, perhaps too much. And I thought the first page was a good opener to kind of really catch the attention as we see Catwoman, or who we assume is Catwoman, shooting a cop using a gun. It's like, okay, well, clearly Catwoman has changed very drastically within the last time we've seen her. It seems a little out of character, but then we learn to see, what exactly is happening there. I think, it actually had a really great 60s aesthetic. You even see Selena Kyle in this casino-like den, very James Bond-esque. And in the background, we get the introduction into who will eventually be the new villain for this series. And a great introduction, a great panel where we see this woman who is very, looks like a politician's wife, all done up, drastically turned into something that is not that. Joelle Jones mentioned that she has seen pretty much every villain when it comes to comics tends to be overly sexualized, great looking, and wanted to create a character that was not that, which is exactly what she did. Because once you take off, something about not having a nose just really brings that to the next dimension when it comes to just being grotesque. And we do see a little fallout regarding the events of Batman 50, not a lot. The little bit that was there I thought was rather effective. Gives us a little understanding of how Alfred and Batman are taking what happened, along with just the hold it still has on Selena, and just where she is in life, and how it's the emotional reaction and realization. A lot was said without much words on the page, which what you would expect with someone like a Joelle Jones who can write and draw her own stuff. And that's the only thing I worry about is, can she maintain a pace of a major book like this? Hopefully she was given a lot of time. It probably means we won't see her in the pages of Batman all that much, which is kind of sad because I did like a lot of the issues that she did. But her getting her own series is, I think, really great because she certainly has earned it, especially being able to write and draw, which is a rarity. And I can't really think of any other current book right now in the big two where we have the same writer and artist. The person writing and drawing it is the same. So that's a feat within itself. So even if I think you hated Batman 50, maybe give Catwoman #1 a chance. It's certainly its own thing, which was one of my concerns, which it would be just Catwoman dealing with whatever the ramifications of her marrying Batman was, or not marrying Batman. But that doesn't seem to be the case. It's certainly there in pieces, but the major focus is this other issue that's going on. Perhaps that they will deal with it more moving forward or the pages of Batman. Also coming out from DC this week was Man of Steel #6, the end of the series from Brian Michael Bendis, his introduction into the character of Superman as we gear up for Superman #1 and Action Comics 1001 to come out shortly. And I have to say this ended better than it started. I liked issue 1, but it really felt like it became this elongated mystery the more and more it went on. And finally with issue 6, where we get answers to the question that's been kind of plaguing this book from issue 1, feels like things are finally coming together. It felt like at the end of this book, it could have been 3 issues would have sufficed to tell this story. I don't think it needed 6. And I do like some of the answers that we get. Overall, what I really like about Bendis' approach with Superman is that I do like his voice for the character. This is very much a thinking man, Superman. I like how he's had to, even in the pages of this book, Bendis points out that, you know, he's put him in situations where he can't punch his way out of. And I did love that little remark on this issue. As you know, it was something I was thinking. It is very cliche to say, and that is kind of a Bendis-esque element of this issue, which is something that became more and more apparent as the series went on, where it didn't feel like Bendis to begin with, but by the end, and it felt like his voice was coming more and more prevalent. I do say I could care less about this new villain and what he may or may not have connections to regarding Krypton and all that history. I still don't care a great deal. I don't love the idea that Jonathan and Lois will be gone from this book. I'm interested to see how it does impact Superman and Clark Kent. I hope it's not just something that is just forgotten about and just put to the side and we just deal with Superman basically as new status quo, but without having to actually get rid of the characters. I'm going to miss that, I believe, because I really enjoyed that element of Superman, having being a father, having him interact with Jonathan. And I don't love the idea of Kal-El existing. That wasn't Bendis' doing in the normal DC universe, so any interaction with him, I just was hoping he was a character people would go away and people would forget exists. But still, I do like the way that Bendis writes Supergirl as well. So I don't know if she will play a role in Action Comics, maybe. Who knows? But at the end of this, am I more excited going into Bendis' run in Superman than I was before this started? Yes, mainly because I did not love his issue or his story in Action Comics 1000. So I guess that way it's a success. I know for many that may not be the case. This may have detracted from their excitement of Bendis taking over this book, but for me, I at least hoping with the issues coming up being more focused and hopefully not just having this mystery that is unnecessary, elongated with a panel each issue coming up, it will be better, and hopefully he'll build on some of the benefits of and strengths of this run and become able to kind of bring this all together by the end of it. I'm hoping that it doesn't harp too much on this new character and he's forgotten about, but who knows? There's a good chance he'll be popping up once again, not too far future. Also coming out this week from the world of Marvel was Captain America #1. Ta-Nehisi Coates is beginning his run in this character with art by Linus Francis Yu, and I enjoyed this issue for the most part. I was surprised by how much of this was still dealing with the aftermath of Hydra taking over the United States and Secret Empire. We see a world that's very splintered, a world that still doesn't fully trust Captain America, him fighting against it, him himself feeling disillusioned in a way, because not only has Hydra taken over, or not only did they only take over the United States by force, but they, in a way, won over the hearts and minds. So is there something actually deeper wrong with the country he loves, causing that problem? At the same time, we're seeing Selene, who I think is a mutant from the Hellfire Club, and her interactions actually in Russia of all places. And what I like about this is certainly dealing with the political climate of today. Certainly some allegorical implications that can be made. However, it's not direct, and it also deals with, I think, some of the ways we dealt with World War II in its aftermath, forgiving a lot of Nazi scientists of their wrongdoing to betterment of our own. And we see people like Baron von Strucker, for example, where his sins have been forgiven because he helped bring down Hydra. Even some other characters as well, where it seems like, a lot of on the borderline villains of Captain America's past are now in positions of power. So that could be a cool dynamic moving forward. Ta-Nehisi Coates has worked a lot at becoming a better comic book writer, and it has shown on this. His pacing is better. He's trusting his artists more. Linus Francis Yu is a good choice for an artist. He has a good stoic aspect to his writing. The only confusion I had was this had a lot of these characters of Nitro, or Nuke, I should say, and at first I thought it was the same character on the page, just represented in a few areas to show motion, but then I realized, oh no, there's a bunch of these. So there was some confusion at the beginning, but that was, I think, more so myself than the execution of the art. And he is an artist I haven't seen a lot of recently, so it's kind of good to see him here. I do like the way that he drops Cap. I love that Cap's in his classic uniform again. And this also had a great sequence that were just a conversation between Steve Rogers and Sharon Carter. And Yu's art is not usually very full of expression, but he was able to, I think, nail that conversation in those pages pretty well. And their dynamic has been, it's kind of interesting now that they're both dealing with the fallout of some horrific things that happened to them, where even things like the Remender Run are so permeating throughout this Captain America. And there's a lot of elements from past Captain America runs that are showing up here and there, even from Ed Brubaker's run. So Coates is certainly a student of the game when it comes to comics. He knows his comic history sometimes too much, especially showed in Black Panther, that there was just too much of, I think, things that happened in the past that were hard to read for a new reader. But in this, it's a little more new reader friendly. And if you've not read all those other Captain America runs, you should be fine. It is tied a lot into Secret Empire, but if you don't know the details to that, I think you'll be okay as well. Scotty Young is continuing his run on Deadpool with Deadpool number 2. I wasn't in love with the first issue of Deadpool that he put out. I was anticipating a great deal. Maybe my anticipation got the better of me. The first issue seemed a little messy. The design of it was put up with like 3 separate stories that were somewhat connected, and it was a little bit it was almost being too cute, and it ended up being undercutting itself, I felt like, by the end of it. This is much more straightforward, and I feel like Scotty Young is developing a cool little world for Deadpool. We see he's working in this mall, and it opens up with his interaction with, I'm guessing, his friends from the mall. Big diatribe against what is kind of Ready Player One, but not officially Ready Player One, but also ends up being a joke against Deadpool himself. And much of this issue is just the Avengers trying to get Deadpool's help because this crazy Celestial has come to Earth. No, not the ones from Avengers, but a different one. And he has some weapon that he got way back when. That is the only thing that can take it out. So it's cool seeing Deadpool, the wacky, crazy Deadpool that we haven't gotten in a while, because with Jerry Dugan's run, it was a little bit more low key, even for Deadpool's sake. But this is the insane Deadpool that, like, you can just tell that the Avengers have no desire to be dealing with him at all, and just having to interact with him in any form is just annoying. So that was a lot of fun, and also seems like there's just something in the water at Marvel where they're just going for it with insanity. You see that a lot with Donny Cates stuff, and we're seeing that with this. When you have a celestial-like being that comes to Earth in like a Harley, and then lands and is legitimately like puking out different things, like it's just green vomit coming from him. I'm like, this is insanity. This isn't a Deadpool book that, usually Deadpool is more street level, crazy, wacky things, but here we're dealing with like a literal god that barfs. So a little juvenile, but if you're going to do juvenile, it makes sense to do it in a Deadpool comic. So I think true, like, big Deadpool fans will like this. If you like Deadpool movie, I think you'll like this. If you enjoyed the more well-rounded take that Jerry Duggan had, may not, because it's a little bit more classic, quippy Deadpool, the sarcastic, breaking the fourth wall type of situation. So I find it fun, at least. It's enjoyable. It's a good palate cleanser for dealing with some of the more serious books. It's a good thing to kind of just read when you want a few jokes here and there. Speaking of just wanting a few jokes here and there, that comes in with Cosmic Ghost Rider number 1. I was really anticipating this book. This is coming from the pages of Thanos Wins, Donny Cates' work on that. He's writing this again with an artist, Dylan Burnett, who's an artist I'm not super familiar with, and I really don't know anything he did before this, which is surprising because he came on rather strong in this issue right away. And I got to give Donny Cates credit. Like, he can write visually really well. He trusts his artists, and he's been bringing on interesting artists. We have Jeff Shaw doing the Thanos run, and now Dylan Burnett doing this. And the first few pages is just a quick recap of everything that came up to that point, and it was done well. It was effective. It was great to look at. And then we're kind of in the heat of battle, where we see the aftermath of Cosmic Ghost Rider, who's now dead, and in Valhalla, because he was killed by Thor's hammer. So I guess, being a warrior, Odin, he goes into why he brought the Punisher there. However, Frank Castle is not content for a variety of reasons. He likes, because some of the Vikings, are not great people. And when you have the Punisher around people that are not great people and have done some moral reprehensible things, he'll spare no expense and go straight after them. Also, though, I think more meaningful, like his family's not there. And for him, the afterlife, for it to be truly heaven, he would need his family. So he makes a deal with Odin, who sends him to any place he wants at any time. He does that, but with that, though, he sends him as Cosmic Ghost Rider. And I do like how we see how Coates differentiates how he writes Ghost Rider and Frank Castle. Cosmic Ghost Rider is a little bit more crazy, a little bit more manic. He doesn't have all those things together. And because of that, maybe makes choices that ends up making things more difficult than they need to be. This was a little bit, it was very much a setup issue. This is only a 5-issue mini, so I think it's going to be a fun one-and-done type of thing. I don't think Cosmic Ghost Rider would have his own ongoing. Who knows? We've had worse characters with their ongoing, so maybe that can happen. But again, it's similar to Deadpool, where it's a fun, enjoyable read. Not much here beyond just what's on the page, And unlike Thanos, which I thought got into deeper themes, we can do that with a character like the Mad Titan because there's a lot more to unpack. Where with Punisher and Cosmic Ghost Rider, typically what they are is what they are, and there's not much underneath that. But maybe there will be as this continues and moves on. But it's fun and just enjoyable. It's crazy. Again, it's Marvel going out and just doing crazy, epic, big things. It may not be everyone's cup of tea, but if you like people that just like, you know what, I'm going to have someone punch a baby and that be okay, you have a comic you can now read, and that happens. So kudos for Kate for somehow getting that approved. I guess when you don't really have the comic book authority anymore, you can get away with things like that. Also coming from Marvel, we had Doctor Strange number 3, and I liked the first 2 issues of this run. I didn't love it. It felt like everything I liked, there was something that kind of bugged me. I still not a huge fan of the idea of Doctor Strange going on a journey to reclaim his magic because he just recently lost it. But part of me thinks that, where he lost magic before because of this outside force that took it away from him, I feel like there's something here that is being hinted at where he lost his magic for more of an internal reason. There's a lot of use of this omniscient narrator speaking a lot of the past. Strange is talking a lot about regret, and I don't know if it's dealing with the past series and what he did with Zelma, or more if there's more to the story we don't know. But I feel like with a lot of the callbacks of him being a doctor, with him still dealing with the fact that he can't drive because of that is the thing that took his power of being a doctor away from him. I wonder if there's just something there. This issue feels like it's actually going to get into what more the series is going to be like, the space adventure with his newfound space alien friend as they go to different planets searching for artifacts. So and when you have creatures like or characters like the Super Skrull show up, I'm all for it. I did feel like the writing of Super Skrull, he was a little bit too one note. I appreciated what they did with him with like the Annihilation run, where Super Skrull felt a little bit more complete as a character. This is more 60s crazy Skrull that's straightforward, which was a little bit disappointing, but it did lead to one of the better moments of the series so far, where we see what makes Doctor Strange a unique hero. He's a hero dealing with godlike characters, where Morelli's not very black and white. People do things. He's dealing with characters that, good and evil, those are just words, really. They go with both sides of the spectrum, and dealing with artifacts to do the same thing. And here, he has to do some things that perhaps other Avengers wouldn't do, that perhaps are not morally right, but necessary, or maybe they're not necessary, but also like what's that doing to him? How he can never fully embrace someone because something always comes up where he has to do something questionable that they may not be aware of, where, the idea of trust and how it's nearly impossible for him to gain that with an individual for a long period of time, because eventually he'll have to do something that will, provide some distance between them. So I found that as a good, promising start. Like I said, this is probably the best issue of it so far. I'm hoping we get more of this, and the aspect of him losing his magic becomes more, more second tier when it comes to the story. But I've been debating about should I continue with the series, should I not? And after this, I feel like I'm going to continue with it, at least for the end of this first arc. I do like seeing Doctor Strange dealing with cosmic characters. I hope more of that happens, like we deal with characters like Eternity or the Living Tribunal. Don't know if that will happen, but when you have a character like Strange in space, it feels like a great opportunity to approach some of those characters that don't often appear in the pages of most Marvel comics. Also coming from Marvel, we had Star Wars number 50. Star Wars is a series I tend to read the first issue or two of an arc, and then after that decide to stick with it or not stick with it. I like really Jason Aaron's run on it, but sometimes the art to me can really bring it down a great deal, and if I'm not loving the story, I tend not to bother with it. I picked up issue 50 because it seems like Star Wars is now, it's been in between A New Hope and Empire, and now it's on the other side of that, getting closer to the events that happened in Empire Strikes Back. And I gotta say, it's gotta be tough to write Star Wars books in between two movies. You are put in a huge bind where you're really limited on what you can do. You know, there's certain characters that you certainly can't kill off. They can't really change that much from book to book. You know what's happening in between, so you're dealing with a very limited space to tell, galactic level stories. So anything that is at all enjoyable to read, it takes a lot of work. Star Wars 50, as I said, it seems like we're gearing into the events of Empire. It starts with the rebels are in a good spot. They have resources, they have friends. It seems like they're ready and poised to take on the Empire like never before. But knowing this is Star Wars, knowing what's to come, things don't go really well. Again, I have to say the art, Salvador Larroca, I'm sure he's a great person, but his use of facial recognition when it comes to Star Wars is super distracting. It's one thing when you do it with someone like Mark Hamill for Luke Skywalker. I can somewhat forgive it within that, but when you have side characters, new characters, people in the background, and you're utilizing actors and characters from completely different mediums, it just feels a little bit lazy and takes you out of the story unnecessarily. When you're looking at, it's like, that guy was in Game of Thrones. Why is he in the pages of a Star Wars book? It just feels a little unnecessary. I know, this got to be tough trying to keep up all these Star Wars deadlines. Maybe that's the reason why, but I really miss Stuart Eminem on Star Wars. It brought a new life to it. When the book is more space battles and dealing with ships and things like that, it's not necessarily as hard to deal with. And to me, the story was strong enough that I could at least go with the art. But I do think that Star Wars would be such a better book if they had more consistent art on it. And I have to say, though, this has an amazing Darth Vader moment, which was rather cool. I don't want to spoil it, but it shows you just how big of a badass, or how much control Darth Vader can have as this one of the greatest villains of all time. So if you're someone who has not been reading Star Wars and maybe gave up on it, I think this might be a good jumping on point, like it was for me, because I think it's finally getting into some different stories. It was kind of treading water there for a little bit, but now that it's gearing up towards the Empire Strikes Back storylines, it feels like it's finally pushing forward and getting into some new territory for the first time in quite some time. All right, well, moving on to the world of Dark Horse, we have Sword Daughter number 2. I picked up the series because it's written by Brian Wood, who I'm a fan of. He's done a lot of great work. He's done other similar stories like this. This is another Viking story taking place in year 991. Something like Black Road. I loved his work on Briggs Land. And with this, its premise is that it's a father and daughter story where their village was attacked by this Viking gang, and after that, nearly everyone was killed, but the father and the father was in the comatose-like state for some time, and the daughter ended up raising herself for the most part. Now he's out of it, and they're traveling to seek revenge, and I'm all for good revenge stories, especially when you have the focus of a relationship between a father and a son or a daughter. And it seemed like what this might be, it's going to be a long journey, of course. And here they stumble upon a village where people have been killed and they're blamed for it. But the father indicates he'll actually find out who did it. And we're learning a little bit more and more about who he is. And we see that he ends up, he doesn't want to take life unless he necessarily has to. And he's a little bit more pacifist than you would expect for someone of this time frame. I do like this era because, it's like civilization is still just on the precipice of coming together. A lot of small villages. It feels like there's like 500 people in the entire world. But with that, morality is still very much a choice. Like, he could easily kill someone, and there's really no repercussions for it. So being a good person, it truly is just your nature, and what that means, and then how that is interaction with his daughter. We don't get a lot of that here, and his daughter's mute. All of her communication happens through symbols, through the lettering. It's an interesting trick, but I do wonder if it ends up being more of a hindrance, and they still feel very distant, and their interaction is almost non-existent at this point. So for this series, I think, to remain strong, for it to have a hook beyond just a revenge story, I hope there's more focus there. It's got to be a slow build, of course, because they were separated for such a long time. She's still kind of probably recovering from that fact that her father was absent basically for most of her life. And it's an interesting struggle because he's still trying to protect her, even though she was on her own for such a long time. It's like, why suddenly now, though, he's taking up his role? But I've enjoyed it. Not to me as strong as Wood's best stuff. So I will continue with it, but it does seem like it might be a story best fitted in trade, because there's not been a lot of story for these two issues, but that could change moving forward. I don't know if the design of it's going to be this. They go to a town and there's a new thing they have to deal with. If that will be the continuous journey, I would assume it'd have to be, because unless this is only a 6-issue series, they can't jump right in and fight this other Viking gang right away. So I'm guessing it's going to be a slow burn. And if you enjoy that stuff, I think you might enjoy this. All right, let's move over to the world of Image for Death or Glory #3, the new series by Rick Remender and art by Ben Gall. I've liked the series so far, but I think this is probably my favorite issue of the series overall. It is a very exposition-heavy issue. The beginning of it is just learning about Glory's story, her parents' story, where they came from, the life that they lived, like this off-the-grid, adventurous type of family. She didn't really go to school. She learned through experience, and how that often led to some problems, and now a great deal of difficulty as there are people that don't have any type of health insurance, and with her father dealing with his health woes. It gives us like an idea of, okay, why Glory is in this situation, as well as some of the other players, like her ex-boyfriend or husband, and how she did try to settle at one moment in time, and how that didn't work out for her. I guess it makes sense to approach the story like this, give us some introduction into this world, but then take a step back and just lay everything at our feet. I do like the style that Remender uses. He uses this style a lot with Deadly Class as well, utilizing the lettering on the left-hand side, and just a few pages of panels of just deep narration, and you can cover a lot of ground in that way. Some people might not like it because it is taking a step back. It is slowing down a great deal, but I think it's necessary to give us some understanding of who Glory is, to give us really invested into her plight and her story, because at this time we have a little bit of why she's doing what she's doing, but this gives us better perspective, and especially regarding some of the other players, and how they fit into this. I do think, though, that the second piece of this, as it gets into more of the present day, I like Ben Gall's art, but I find at times it's hard to fully comprehend everything that's on the page. There's like a moment where they're in this meat factory, and there's a lot of things going down, and just the composition on the page, it's unclear, I think, at times what exactly is happening. I will say, I mentioned when the first issue, it was a little more straightforward than I expected. That is changing rapidly, especially with this issue, as we're finding that there are more notorious things going on, and dealing with body parts and selling of refugees as they're going throughout the country, and how it's more than just a drug story. We thought at first it was just this person looking to get drugs, and then it ended up being a trafficking situation, and then it ended up being even more than that. So the end of last issue, it seemed to like there's this gang war that was about to break out. It didn't touch upon that. I'm guessing that will be coming up soon. But it's been a fun book. It's been different, and it's not, to me at this point, the level of Remender's best stuff, but it's on its way. I'm glad we got a little bit more character background in this, because that was the one thing I felt was missing. And now with that, I hope some of the more titular characters, some of the other characters, we get them built up a little bit too, to really expand this world. Overall, though, I would recommend this series. It's been a lot of fun, and a nice little change of pace, at least when it comes to a stylistic standpoint, art-wise, when it comes to Remender stuff. Last but not least, we have Judge Dredd Under Siege #2. I picked up the series because I'm not a huge Judge Dredd fan. I've not read a lot of Judge Dredd comics. So if you're a huge Dredd fan and maybe you don't like this series for whatever reason, know that as a novice for that world, I am enjoying it a great deal. I picked it up because of the writer Mark Russell, who's done Flintstones, he's done Snagglepuss, and was interested to see what he would take away when it comes to a work like Judge Dredd, more of a straightforward type of superhero like character, and he's still bringing his type of style and storytelling to this issue specifically. We don't get a lot of Dredd. It's more of building that of Mega City 1 and this Patrick Swayze block that was created, how it was designed to be kind of a mecca, a place of hope, and how it was going to change and provide opportunity, but that ended up not working, and how that fallout occurred. But also a lot of social-esque commentary. It's weird reviewing this next to Death or Glory because both are dealing with the idea of organs and the selling of organs, giving of organs, and it almost felt more transmetropolitan than it did Judge Dredd, taking the insanity of that type of world, just things people would have to do in order to get by, and more of the street level normal citizen, that's not a judge that has to just do what they can to make a living, and links people would go to in order to have that accomplished. So I did like that, and I do like, even though we're getting that, at the same time in the background we have this story of all these citizens just trying to, with the help of the judges, fight for their lives. So there's a lot going on in this 5-issue miniseries, and again, if you're not a huge if you are a huge Judge Dredd fan, maybe you're not loving the fact that it's not more straightforward. But as someone who wants a little bit more, I've appreciated it. If you're someone who did like Mark Russell's work on other things and wanted to know what it'd be like if he took over, a general comic, this is a good idea of that. And I hope it's kind of like a proving ground and showing he can take his style, take his ability to, provide commentary in a meaningful and comedic way that's smart and engaging, and placing it into your typical comic book character. This type of story may not work for every character. I think it works for Judge Dredd because you're dealing with this insanity of Mega City 1, and certainly within Dredd, even if it is an action-based comic, there's always been that idea behind it, I would assume, just based upon my limited experience with it. So yeah, I would definitely recommend this. It's only the second issue, and it may not the best jumping on point, but it's not like a lot of story happened the last time. So I hope this gets some notoriety or get some attention, because if this ends up becoming an ongoing, or it keeps up with this book, I think it could bring in some new readers, myself included, to the world of Mega City 1. All right, well, that brings us to the end of this week's show, and if you want to interact with the show, there's a lot of ways to do so. You can find me on Twitter at Movie Revolt. You can send an email to the show at feedback@geekcastradio.com. Go to geekcastradio, nerdly.co.uk, and comment on the episode post as well. Also, if you're feeling bored and if you really would like to help out the show, go to iTunes, leave a review. I have a couple of reviews, but more would help a great deal. If you do enjoy my content in any form, do know that if you go to Geekcast Radio's YouTube page, I've been putting out a lot of content on that page as well. I've been doing some more in-depth reviews of different Marvel and DC books, like Cosmic Ghost Rider, like Catwoman, Batman 50, as well as dives into my long box for more comics that impacted me as a fan, starting with my first comic I've ever read, X-Men number 11, Captain America number 1 from the Ed Brubaker run, and then other graphic novels I've been reading through my graphic thoughts, and then also must-read comics, where I try to pick out some of the best comics that I've ever read, or at least recently read, and talk about why you must read them. Recently did one, and we'll have one up soon, regarding the comic from Dark Horse, Muhammad Ali. I highly would recommend reading that, and hopefully enjoying my little discussion about it as well. And like I said, you can find that all at the YouTube page for Geekcast Radio. And check out Geekcast Radio for a variety of other topics, my other podcasts, Cinema Geeks, where we talk about movies. And if you're into classic cartoons, technology, anything that is anything, really, go to Geekcast Radio and you'll find it there. But that'll be it for this week. Tune in next week as I get into more weekly comics. Remember that comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one. Thanks for listening.
They never sleep as far as I can see. The Mexicans are naming them after me. Give me much money cause the drinks are free. Hey everybody, they're on me. 'Cause City Rockers is the only place I wanna be. Hey, Montevideo. Oh, 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 oh. Hey, Montevideo. Yeah, yeah. Hey, Montevideo. You'll be the end of me. Should have been in bed as a go. Where the time goes when you're having fun, I don't know. My head is dizzy and my knees are weak. Getting loud outside, but it's too early to sleep. They all go crazy when the sun goes down. It needs some daylight anyway. There's only one thing on my mind and I've gotta say.